It began with silence. The kind of silence that feels like a scream, deafening, disorienting, impossible to ignore. Then came the 6 words that sent shockwaves across the United Kingdom. I'm divorcing Harry. It's over. No statement from Buckingham Palace. No glossy PR rollout. No smiling photos or cryptic social media posts. Just those words, reportedly whispered during a private call, that somehow made their way into the public bloodstream faster than wildfire on a dry hill. By dawn, the headlines were everywhere. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, the woman who had once turned the monarchy upside down, was leaving the man she had once called her soulmate. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But was this truly the end? Or had it been a long time coming? Written in invisible ink long before the cameras stopped flashing? Let's start with the moment that no one saw coming. It wasn't a red carpet. It wasn't an awards gala. Meghan wasn't smiling this time. She was seen walking alone, Montecito's sunlight bouncing off her sunglasses, her jaw tight, her phone pressed to her ear. A witness later claimed she looked calm, but cold. It was that eerie calm that made the rumor believable. Something had changed. Something big. And within hours, whispers began trickling out of sources close to the Sussex circle. There were irreconcilable differences, tensions at home, unfixable cracks. But behind those polite phrases hid a deeper truth, one that insiders had seen building for months. What happened between Meghan and Harry? How did the royal rebel couple, once hailed as the modern face of monarchy, crumble under the same pressure they swore to escape? And why now, when everything seemed quiet, would Meghan suddenly pull the trigger? Let's be honest, this isn't just celebrity gossip. This is history repeating itself with a modern twist. Because the moment Meghan decided to step into the royal arena, the world stopped seeing her as a woman and started seeing her as a symbol. To some, she was the embodiment of change, a woman of color, confident, outspoken, unafraid to break the rules. To others, she was the disruptor, the outsider who didn't play by royal tradition. But maybe, just maybe, Meghan was both. And now, as the UK reels from her shocking announcement, it's time to ask the question that no one dares to say out loud. Was this the plan all along? Or is Meghan Markle finally breaking under the weight of the crown she claimed to reject? Before we go further, let's rewind. Because this story, like all royal tragedies, didn't begin with an ending. It began with a promise. A fairy tale wedding. A global love story. A prince and an actress who dared to say they'd found real love in a fake world. The world believed it. We wanted to. The carriage, the vows, the stolen glances, everything looked perfect. But behind those diamond smiles were shadows no camera could catch. Harry was a man torn between 2 worlds. One foot in the palace, one in freedom. Meghan was a woman learning that fairy tales come with a script, and hers wasn't written by her. Fast forward to California, the land of sunshine and reinvention. The couple was finally free, or so we thought. But something was off. The glow faded. Their project stalled. The paparazzi found them anyway. And the world that once cheered for their independence started asking questions. What exactly are they doing now? That's when the fractures began to show. Small things at first, conflicting interviews, awkward appearances, rumors of arguments about money and media. But like any glass castle, one crack was all it took to start the collapse. And now, after years of drama, documentaries, and denials, Meghan has allegedly done the unthinkable, ending her royal marriage. But the timing is what makes it truly explosive. Because according to royal insiders, this announcement comes right as King Charles is said to be tightening financial oversight on the Sussexes. There's talk of frozen funds, revoked privileges, and private warnings sent from the palace to California. Coincidence? Or cause and effect? And if Meghan's truly decided to walk away, who's walking away with the fortune, the titles, and the children? The British public has seen its share of royal breakups. Charles and Diana, Andrew and Sarah, even Princess Anne's quiet separation. But Meghan and Harry's story is different. It's not just a marriage ending. It's a global brand collapsing in real time. Because when Meghan said, "I'm divorcing Harry," she didn't just end a relationship. She detonated a narrative. Let's dig into that for a moment. For years, Meghan and Harry built their public image around unity. Us against the world. They sold it through interviews, Netflix specials, and memoirs. Every camera, every quote, every documentary angle reinforced the same story: the misunderstood lovers standing against an unjust system. But behind that carefully curated message, insiders now claim cracks were everywhere. Tension over creative control, conflicts about money, a growing emotional distance. And here's the part no one saw coming. The royal circle reportedly knew. One courtier was quoted saying, "Harry was lost before he even realized it." Another source claimed Meghan had been emotionally checked out since last year. And a close friend allegedly said she'd been planning her exit quietly. Was it revenge? Or was it survival? You decide. Because when we trace Meghan's public behavior over the last few months, her selective appearances, cryptic statements, even her refusal to attend key royal events, a pattern emerges. It's not random. It's strategic, like someone preparing the world for something bigger. And then came the confirmation, subtle at first, then undeniable. The BBC allegedly received private briefings from royal staff. The tabloids lit up. The hashtags exploded. Hashtag Sussex separation trended worldwide. Suddenly, every photo, every quote, every interview from the past 5 years was reinterpreted under a new lens. That handhold during the Oprah interview? Forced. That nervous smile at the Invictus Games? A mask. That Netflix love story? A cover. But here's the twist. While the UK is in shock, some people claim they saw it coming. Let's talk about the signals. Months ago, Meghan was spotted without her engagement ring, explained away as being cleaned. Then came a cryptic comment during a podcast appearance where she said, "Sometimes you have to choose peace, even if it breaks your heart." At the time, no one thought much of it. But now, it feels prophetic. And there's more. Reports surfaced of Harry spending extended time in London for meetings. Meghan, meanwhile, was seen dining solo in Beverly Hills, smiling, but not the smile we remember. It was thinner, rehearsed. Even friends like Serena Williams and Oprah went quiet. No posts, no mentions, no public support. The inner circle was silent, always a sign that something seismic is about to break. And now it has. The world wants to know why. Did Meghan grow tired of living in the shadow of the monarchy? Did Harry's loyalty to the royal family finally tear them apart? Or was it something deeper, betrayal, secrets, or exhaustion from years of scrutiny? Whatever it is, this isn't just a breakup. It's a reckoning. Because Meghan Markle isn't just another celebrity, she's a cultural flashpoint. Her every move ignites debates about race, class, feminism, and royalty. So when she announces something this explosive, it doesn't just break hearts, it breaks systems. But as the headlines pile up and the analysts speculate, one thing stands out. The timing feels deliberate. Why now? Why not months ago? Why not wait until after the next royal event, the next Netflix deal, the next PR opportunity? Because, according to sources close to the couple, something happened behind the scenes. A final straw, a secret confrontation, maybe even a betrayal that left Meghan with no other choice. We'll get to that. But first, imagine the royal reaction. King Charles, blindsided. Prince William, allegedly furious. The palace press office, scrambling to regain control. Even the Queen's legacy, pulled once again into the storm. Because if Meghan and Harry's marriage truly dissolves, it raises unprecedented questions. What happens to their titles? Their children's status? Their security? Their brand? Their royal lineage? And if Meghan's walking away, is she walking into something else? There are whispers of new projects, new alliances, new beginnings that make this divorce seem less like an ending and more like a transformation. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. For now, the only thing certain is uncertainty. And the United Kingdom, a nation that once watched Meghan and Harry's wedding like a modern fairy tale, is now watching the unraveling with equal fascination and disbelief. As one London columnist put it, she arrived a symbol of change. She leaves a storm. And yet, even in the chaos, there's something hauntingly human about this moment. A woman who gave up her world for love. A man who gave up his crown for freedom. Two people who thought they could rewrite history, only to find themselves trapped in its pages. Maybe Meghan's announcement isn't about bitterness or revenge. Maybe it's about closure, the kind that doesn't come with tears, but with a calm voice saying, "Enough." Because behind all the speculation, one truth stands out. This wasn't impulsive. It was inevitable. And as the world speculates on what comes next, one thing is clear: this story is far from over. Because what Meghan said after those 6 words will make everything we thought we knew about her, about Harry, and about the royal family completely collapse. It didn't begin with a statement. It began with a sound, or rather, the absence of one. No royal age shuffling papers, no buzzing phones from Montecito PR teams, no carefully worded joint announcement. Just a silence that felt wrong. The kind of silence that usually comes before a storm. Then, out of nowhere, it broke. A single message, 6 words, echoed through the digital corridors of the British press like a gunshot. Meghan Markle has filed for divorce. No source named. No confirmation. Just those words, glowing on a journalist's phone screen at 2:13 a.m. London time. And within minutes, every editor from the Times to the Sun was wide awake. Reporters scrambled. Producers yelled into headsets. The BBC ran a breaking news banner before Buckingham Palace even knew what hit them. But here's the twist. The news didn't come from a royal leak. It didn't even come from Meghan's camp. According to insiders, it came from an encrypted email sent from an anonymous account with a subject line that read, "For your eyes only. It's over." So who sent it? And why that way? Was it an insider trying to expose Meghan's next move? A mole from the palace? Or, as some speculated, was it Meghan herself, testing how the world would react before making it official? Think about it. In the world of modern royalty, image is everything. Every smile, every frown, every syllable is calculated. So what if this wasn't a leak at all, but a warning? Because that's what the first few hours felt like, a warning shot across the royal bow. By dawn, social media was in meltdown. Hashtag Meghan divorces Harry trended worldwide. Commentators went feral. Some called her the new Diana, finally breaking free. Others accused her of abandoning the man who gave up his crown for her. The world split into 2 camps, just like it did the day they left the royal family. But this time, something felt different. This wasn't Meghan versus the monarchy. It was Meghan versus herself. Let's rewind to those critical 12 hours before the world exploded. Sources close to the Sussex inner circle say Meghan had been unusually quiet in the days leading up to the announcement. No paparazzi sightings. No public events. No leaked photos from Montecito. Even her foundation's social media accounts went dark. Then came the first real sign something was wrong. Around 6 p.m. Los Angeles time, neighbors noticed Harry leaving their Montecito mansion alone. No security convoy, no PR handlers. Just Harry, baseball cap low, driving off in his black Range Rover. He didn't come back that night. Now pause for a second. That's not nothing. Harry doesn't go anywhere without security, and he never leaves without notice. So where was he going? And more importantly, what had just happened inside that house? Hours later, Meghan was reportedly seen pacing her garden, phone in hand. A neighbor claimed she looked like someone holding onto her last thread of patience. One insider said she'd been on a call with her mother, Doria Ragland, for over an hour. What did they talk about? Some say it was a conversation that changed everything. Because within 2 hours of that call, that email, the one that set the world on fire, was sent. Coincidence? Or the start of a strategy? Let's dig deeper. When Meghan and Harry left royal life in 2020, they built their future around one thing: unity. They branded themselves as a team, a force of 2 against an outdated system. Every interview, every deal, every appearance screamed, "We're in this together." But in recent months, subtle cracks started showing. Interviews where Harry seemed distant. Meghan appearing solo more often. Anonymous friends telling tabloids that Meghan was disillusioned and Harry longed for his old life. At first, people dismissed it as gossip. But then came the real red flag: Meghan's silence. No denials, no statements, no smiles, just silence. And that's when the British press started sniffing blood. Behind palace walls, aides reportedly scrambled to verify the rumors. King Charles's advisors allegedly contacted Harry's office in London, only to get no reply. One senior official described the mood as eerie, like waiting for an earthquake you can feel coming but can't stop. And then, early that morning, the quake hit. Within 30 minutes of the leak, Buckingham Palace released a terse one-sentence response: "We are aware of the reports and have no comment at this time." No denial, no correction, just the quiet confirmation that something very real was unraveling. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Meghan's representatives stayed silent. No statement, no post, no rebuttal. Which, in Hollywood PR language, means one thing: they were preparing something big. And they were. Because around noon Los Angeles time, Meghan was spotted heading into a private office building in Beverly Hills. Paparazzi snapped her walking briskly, head high, no ring on her left hand. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She didn't even flinch when a reporter shouted, "Meghan, is it true?" Her response? A whisper picked up by a nearby mic. "You'll hear it from me soon." That single sentence became the headline of the day. "You'll hear it from me soon." But what did she mean? Was she confirming the divorce, or warning that there was more to the story? Some believe that line wasn't spontaneous. It was deliberate. Meghan knew exactly what she was doing, shaping the narrative before the palace could. Because if there's one thing Meghan Markle has learned, it's that silence isn't safety. Silence lets someone else tell your story. And this time, she was determined to tell her own. Yet, what makes this chapter even more haunting is how calm it all looked on the surface. No screaming matches. No tearful photos. Just stillness. As if both Meghan and Harry had already emotionally detached long before the paperwork began. But here's where it gets stranger. That same day, a private jet registered under a shell company linked to Archwell reportedly flew from Santa Barbara to London. Manifest details? Confidential. But aviation trackers noticed something odd. The plane landed at RAF Nordholt, a military base often used by royal family members. Who was on board? No one knows for sure. But royal watchers speculate it wasn't Harry or Meghan. It was something being sent. Documents. Legal filings. Evidence. Or perhaps something meant for the royal legal team. Because 48 hours later, sources inside Buckingham Palace confirmed formal communication had been received from the Duchess's lawyers. In plain terms, Meghan had made it official. Now, let's pause here, because that's where the world lost its breath. The royal family, the media, and millions of fans had braced for drama before, but never this. Never the definitive word divorce. People wanted to believe it was just another rumor. That Meghan would issue a denial and post a photo of her and Harry holding hands again. But she didn't. Instead, she disappeared. No Instagram. No public outing. No press. Nothing. The last time something similar happened, it was the week before Megxit, when Harry and Meghan quietly left the UK for Canada. Which makes this vanishing act even more suspicious. Because when Meghan goes silent, she's moving. Strategically. Deliberately. And what happened next confirmed it. By the end of that week, high-level sources began leaking that Harry had flown to London, alone. Not for charity work. Not for family visits. But for personal business. And that's when the story shifted from rumor to reality. British tabloids splashed new headlines. Prince Harry in crisis talks with King Charles. Palace confirms emergency meeting. Royal divorce incoming. Suddenly, Meghan's 6 words, "I'm divorcing Harry. It's over," no longer sounded like speculation. They sounded like the truth. But here's what no one expected. The people closest to Meghan weren't shocked. A source described as a longtime friend told an American magazine that Meghan had been preparing emotionally for this moment for nearly a year. That she tried to make it work, but knew deep down the fairy tale was gone. And then came the part that made jaws drop. The source claimed, she's not just walking away from Harry. She's walking away from the whole illusion. That word, illusion, hit hard. Because if Meghan herself saw their marriage as an illusion, what did that mean for everything they'd shown the world? The Netflix series, the Oprah interview, the memoir, the speeches about love and solidarity. Were they all part of the illusion? It's a painful question, but one we can't avoid. Because every great story has 2 sides, and Meghan's side, the one she promised we'd hear soon, might not be the version the world expects. And while the UK tried to process the emotional bombshell, insiders in Los Angeles whispered that Meghan wasn't crying. She wasn't even angry. She was planning. She reportedly told her team, "We do this on my terms. No one else's." Those words sent chills through royal commentators. Because "on my terms" implies control, and in royal tradition, control is the one thing you're never supposed to have. Yet here she was, rewriting the rules again. And while Harry was said to be pleading for time, Meghan was said to be preparing the speech that would define her legacy. A statement not just about a broken marriage, but about betrayal, identity, and freedom. Because, according to multiple insiders, Meghan didn't leave because of one fight or one scandal. She left because she realized something far more devastating, that she and Harry were no longer fighting the same battle. One wanted peace, the other wanted purpose. And when those two collide, something always breaks. The world thinks they know what happened between Meghan and Harry. But what if everything we've seen so far, every interview, every headline, has been the cover for a much bigger story? Because, as one former aide put it, there are things in those walls, things the public would never believe. And one of those things, we're told, was about to come out. Because what Meghan did next wasn't about love or fame or even revenge. It was about survival. And once she made her next move, there would be no going back, for her, for Harry, or for the entire royal family. What if the truth about the royal marriage wasn't hidden in an interview or a leaked photo, but in a diary? Not a royal report, not a statement. A diary. A leather-bound book, tucked away inside a Montecito drawer, filled with words that were never meant to be seen. It sounds too cinematic to be true, right? But sources close to the couple insist it exists. Meghan's private reflections, her real thoughts, the version of events that no press release could ever sanitize. And if even half of what's written in those pages is true, then everything we thought we knew about Meghan and Harry's relationship is about to shatter. Let's rewind to how it surfaced. After the rumors of divorce broke, tabloids and insiders scrambled to dig up anything: texts, emails, friends willing to talk. And that's when one anonymous former staff member, reportedly a house manager from their Montecito estate, made a startling claim. He said Meghan kept a journal habit. She'd started writing during the early royal years, when the pressure felt unbearable. She'd lock herself in her dressing room for an hour a day, jotting down her thoughts, fears, and frustrations. Handwritten, not digital. Why handwritten? Because paper doesn't leave a digital trail. But the most shocking part? He said the diary didn't stop when they left the royal family. It continued. Through Netflix deals, through pregnancies, through therapy, and even through the crumbling of their marriage. It was her release valve, her secret world, the one place where she didn't have to perform. And that's where the story takes a dark turn. Because according to that same staff member, Harry found it. He wasn't supposed to. One night, several months before the leak, Harry reportedly stumbled upon the diary while looking for their passports before a flight. Inside were hundreds of pages, neatly written, emotional, raw. At first, he read out of curiosity. But then the words started cutting. She had written about him, about them, about Diana. And what he read, insiders claim, broke him. Imagine reading that the person you love, the person you gave up your entire royal identity for, no longer sees you as the same man. That she feels trapped in freedom. That she calls your marriage the performance I can't cancel. That's what Meghan allegedly wrote. And if you think that sounds harsh, it gets worse. She described Harry as a man still haunted by ghosts, and I can't keep loving his grief. That one line reportedly destroyed him. Because if there's one thing that defines Harry, it's his lifelong battle with loss, the shadow of his mother, Diana, still hovering over every decision he makes. And here, in ink, was Meghan saying she couldn't carry that burden anymore. Now, let's pause and think about that. Do you think she meant it out of cruelty or honesty? Because maybe it wasn't spite. Maybe it was a woman exhausted by expectations, by media, by a husband still chasing ghosts of the past. And if that's true, then maybe this wasn't just about a broken marriage. Maybe it was about two broken people trying to heal in different ways. But that diary didn't just hold emotional confessions. It allegedly contained strategic notes, outlines of potential interviews, plans for public statements, even thoughts about life beyond the brand. That phrase, life beyond the brand, kept resurfacing. To royal insiders, it suggested Meghan was thinking long-term, not just about leaving Harry, but about rebranding herself entirely. Remember, this is someone who has always understood the power of narrative. She built her pre-royal career on storytelling. Every blog, every podcast, every appearance crafted with precision. So if Meghan was documenting her unraveling marriage in real time, then that diary wasn't just therapy, it was strategy. And here's the kicker. When Harry confronted her about it, she didn't deny it. One insider claims the argument that followed was eerily quiet. No yelling, No crying. Just silence and a sentence from Meghan that chilled Harry to his core. She allegedly said, "You tell your story. I'm allowed to tell mine." That moment changed everything. Because for Harry, their story had always been one. Together. Shared. But now, for the first time, Meghan had drawn a line between his truth and hers. And from that point on, the emotional distance became physical. Separate rooms. Separate routines. Separate worlds. Yet, the diary wasn't destroyed. Meghan kept writing. And here's where it gets interesting. One of those later entries, according to the same source, referenced the day I stopped pretending. That's believed to be the same day she made her divorce announcement. Coincidence? Hardly. In that same entry, she allegedly reflected on Diana, her parallels, her fears, her guilt for even comparing herself to her. Meghan wrote about watching old footage of Diana's BBC interview, where she said, "There were 3 of us in this marriage." And Meghan's reflection, according to leaks, read something like, "There are ghosts in this one, too. But not the kind people think." What did she mean? Was she talking about Harry's trauma? About the pressure of living in Diana's shadow? Or was she hinting at something else? A hidden dynamic? A third presence shaping their downfall? We don't know. But what's undeniable is that Meghan saw herself not as Diana's successor, but as her echo. Yet, there's a tragic irony here. Because while Diana used her interview to regain her voice, Meghan used her diary to keep her secret, at least for a while. But secrets never stay buried. Especially not when lawyers, journalists, and royal investigators are sniffing for leverage. Because according to reports, when divorce proceedings began, parts of Meghan's handwritten notes were quietly submitted as part of contextual material. Translation? Evidence. Evidence of emotional distress, of manipulation, of self-protection. Now imagine how the royal family reacted when they learned Meghan's private writings could become public record. One palace aide reportedly said, "That diary could do more damage than the Oprah interview." And that's saying something. Because the Oprah interview was the moment the royal image cracked. But this diary, if it's real and revealed, could destroy what's left of the Sussex brand's credibility. Not because Meghan lied, but because she told too much truth. And truth, when written in ink, can't be edited. But let's not forget, diaries don't just record pain. They record turning points. And somewhere in those pages, Meghan apparently wrote about her moment of decision, the exact night she realized it was over. It wasn't during a fight. It wasn't after a betrayal. It was during silence. She described sitting alone in their Montecito living room. Harry was asleep upstairs. The candles were burning down. And she wrote, "It's not hate. It's emptiness." That line, short, simple, devastating, captures the kind of truth no publicist can fix. Because hate you can fight, but emptiness, that's final. From that point on, Meghan's tone shifted, no longer confused, no longer conflicted. Resigned. And as her resignation grew, so did her control. She began planning, moving accounts, updating contracts, calling old contacts in London, even reactivating her personal lawyer who had represented her before the royal wedding. Every move quiet, every call coded, every message untraceable. Meanwhile, Harry, still unaware of the full scope of her plans, was struggling to hold things together. Friends described him as a man living in emotional fog. He was still trying to protect her reputation, even as she was rewriting her role in their story. And the cruel irony? She wasn't hiding it. Because when he confronted her about the diary again, Meghan reportedly told him, "You taught me to speak my truth. I'm just writing it down." For Harry, that must have been unbearable. Because this wasn't betrayal in the classic sense, it was betrayal disguised as honesty. A wound wrapped in words. And once those words left her pen, there was no taking them back. Now, let's connect the dots. The diary surfaces. The rumors explode. The announcement follows. That sequence isn't random. It's deliberate. Which leads to one chilling question. Was the diary meant to be found? Because what if the whole discovery wasn't an accident at all, but a controlled detonation? Meghan's way of ensuring the truth came out on her terms. Think about it. She knew Harry. She knew he'd look for answers. She knew he couldn't resist curiosity. And by leaving that diary in plain sight, she ensured that the end began exactly when she wanted it to. If that's true, then Meghan didn't just walk out of her marriage. She choreographed it. And while the world was still trying to catch up, She'd already written her next act. But we're not done yet. Because hidden inside those pages, among the confessions and reflections, was one section that no one could have anticipated, a section about Diana herself. And when those words leaked, even Meghan's closest allies went silent. Because what she wrote about Harry's mother left everyone speechless. And that is where everything changes. What if history isn't something we just remember? What if it's something that repeats itself, generation after generation, face after face, heartbreak after heartbreak? When Meghan Markle sat down one late evening and watched that now iconic interview of Princess Diana from 1995, the one where Diana said, "There were three of us in this marriage," something inside her reportedly broke. Not because she pitted Diana, but because she recognized herself in her. It wasn't the tiaras, the palaces, or the media storms. It was the loneliness, the feeling of being adored by millions but understood by no one. And that's where Meghan's diary, the one Harry had already discovered, became more than just a journal. It became a mirror, reflecting Diana's ghost through Meghan's words. In one passage, insiders say Meghan wrote, "I finally understand what Diana meant, not about Charles, but about being erased." Erased. That word hung in the air like a curse. Because Meghan didn't just feel controlled by the royal system, she felt rewritten by it. She had entered the palace as Meghan, outspoken, confident, feminist, unafraid. And somewhere along the way, she became a headline, a scandal, a symbol. Never just her. And that's where the parallels with Diana deepen. Let's step back for a moment. Diana was 19 when she entered the royal world, young, naive, and full of dreams. She believed in love, believed that being with a prince meant being cherished. But she soon discovered that royalty was theater, and she was just a character in someone else's script. Now fast forward decades later. Meghan, older, wiser, world-experienced. She thought she could rewrite the script, that she could bend the institution toward modernity. But instead, she found herself swallowed by the same machine that destroyed Diana. Different century, same crown, same silence. And the eerie part? The public saw it happening again. From the moment Meghan joined the royal family, comparisons to Diana were everywhere. She has Diana's charm, they said, Diana's warmth, Diana's defiance. But behind those flattering headlines was a ticking time bomb. Because the same press that worshipped Diana eventually tore her apart. And Meghan could feel the cycle tightening around her neck. She wrote in one of her entries, "I can hear her in the walls. Not her voice, but her warning." Powerful, isn't it? And here's where it turns darker. Multiple insiders claim Meghan became obsessed with Diana's final years. She watched documentaries, read old letters, even contacted one of Diana's former stylists to ask what she was really like when the cameras were off. One close friend said she wasn't trying to imitate Diana. She was trying to understand her, to see where she went wrong. But that obsession came at a price. Because as Meghan studied Diana's life, she began to realize how terrifyingly similar her own had become. The media frenzy, the isolation, the whispers inside the palace, the feeling that love had become performance. And somewhere in those reflections, Meghan reportedly began to fear she might share Diana's fate, not in the literal sense, but in spirit. She once told a friend, "They can't kill me, but they can erase me." Now pause on that. Erase. It's the word that keeps returning over and over in her diary. Erased from the royal narrative. Erased from Harry's emotional world. Erased from her own sense of identity. And that's when the cracks in her marriage became chasms. Because Harry, for all his love, still saw his mother everywhere. Her ghost guided his choices, shaped his fears, even haunted his arguments. He didn't just marry Meghan, he tried to save her. And that's where the tragedy lies. Because Meghan didn't want to be saved. She wanted to be seen. Imagine the irony. Harry thought he was protecting her from the system that destroyed Diana. But in doing so, he unintentionally trapped Meghan inside the same narrative. She became, once again, the woman who needed rescuing. And Meghan, fiercely independent, couldn't stand that. In one alleged diary entry, she wrote, "He loves me like he's making amends to his mother." That line cuts like glass, because it shows exactly where the emotional collision happened. To Harry, Meghan was redemption. To Meghan, Harry was remembrance. And no relationship can survive when love becomes therapy. Let's talk about the emotional stakes here. Friends of the couple say that in the early days, Meghan encouraged Harry to talk about Diana, his pain, his guilt, his memories. She thought openness would heal him. But over time, it consumed him. Every public attack, every tabloid insult, every royal rejection, he'd see it as history repeating itself. He once told a confidant, "I won't lose her like I lost Mom." But that vow, as noble as it was, became suffocating. Because Meghan began to feel that she wasn't allowed to make mistakes, that she had to be perfect, flawless, untouchable, or else she'd become another tragedy in the Windsor archive. And that kind of pressure crushes anyone. So when she wrote that chilling line, "I can't keep loving his grief," it wasn't heartless. It was honest. Because grief, when shared, can bond two people. But when one person becomes the vessel for the other's pain, it destroys them both. And Meghan was done being a vessel. Now, here's where the story takes another twist. According to palace insiders, Meghan once reached out, quietly, to Diana's brother, Earl Spencer. Not for publicity, not for spectacle. For advice. She wanted to know how Diana had coped when she realized she couldn't escape the media circus. The alleged response. A letter, short, somber, devastating. He wrote, "Diana didn't escape. She only stopped running." That line haunted Meghan. Because she realized that running, to America, to Hollywood, to independence, wasn't freedom if she was still chained to the same emotional past. And that's when she began to see her marriage not as sanctuary, but as mirror, a reflection of everything she was trying to flee. So what do you do when love becomes the ghost of someone else's tragedy? You write, you plan, you walk away. That's what the diary shows. That's what the silence in Montecito meant. And here's where the parallel with Diana becomes frighteningly complete. In the last months of Diana's life, she began recording her thoughts on tape, her voice diary. Words meant for history, not gossip. Words she never expected the world to hear. Meghan's handwritten diary feels like an echo of that act, a final attempt to claim her own version of truth before the story gets twisted again. But the question remains, did she intend for it to be found? Because just as Diana's tapes became her legacy, Meghan's diary is becoming hers. And when word of the diary reached Buckingham Palace, the panic was immediate. One senior aide reportedly said, "If she releases even half of it, the public will turn on everyone, even Harry, especially Harry." Because the diary doesn't just show Meghan's pain, it shows her doubts about Harry's decisions, his rages, his insecurities, his need to be needed. One excerpt reportedly read, "He wants me to save him from a family he still misses." That line alone could ignite a media war, because what it implies is brutal, that Harry never truly left the royal world emotionally, even when he left physically. And if Meghan's right, that means their freedom wasn't real. It was just exile with better weather. But here's the most heartbreaking part. Even after writing all that, even after planning her exit, even after sealing her fate, Meghan still wrote one last line under the Diana section. It read, "I loved him enough to leave him before he hated me for staying." That sentence, simple, tragic, final, could only come from someone who knew that love doesn't always end in anger. Sometimes it ends in mercy. And that's why, despite the fury of the press and the judgment of the world, some people see Meghan's divorce announcement not as betrayal, but as self-preservation. Maybe she didn't destroy the fairy tale. Maybe she escaped the nightmare. But what she didn't realize was that her attempt to protect herself would ignite something even darker, a royal retaliation unlike anything she'd faced before. Because the moment the palace got wind of how much Meghan had written, they didn't just sit back. They struck. It started quietly, as breaking points often do. Not with shouting, not with slammed doors, but with a silence that even the walls could feel. A silence so heavy it made the Montecito mansion feel like a tomb. Harry wasn't sleeping. He hadn't for days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her handwriting. The diary. The words. The unfiltered truth that bled through those pages like an open wound. "I can't keep loving his grief." That one sentence had been looping in his head like a curse. He'd read it over and over, hoping he'd misunderstood it. Hoping maybe Meghan hadn't meant it the way it sounded. But she had. And it broke him. He tried pretending everything was normal. Tried making breakfast. Tried sending polite texts to family members he hadn't spoken to in months. Tried telling himself that Meghan was just overwhelmed. But deep down he knew Something inside her had shifted, and no matter what he said or did, she wasn't coming back to the version of herself who once believed in forever. And that realization, that quiet, devastating truth, was when Harry finally cracked. Because for the first time since Diana's death, he couldn't save the person he loved. The night it all came undone, the air in the house felt different. Heavy. Meghan was upstairs, packing. Not frantically, calmly. The way you pack when you've already said goodbye in your heart. Harry stood by the window, staring out at the California sky. The same man who'd fought in Afghanistan, walked behind his mother's coffin, stood against the entire British monarchy, was now just standing there, frozen. He'd thought he'd conquered his demons by leaving the royal family. But now he saw it clearly. He'd only relocated them. The ghosts had followed him across the Atlantic. They always do. He tried to speak, to say something, anything, but the words came out cracked. Why didn't you tell me? Meghan didn't look up. Because you would have tried to stop me. He wanted to scream. He wanted to shake her and ask how they'd gone from fighting the world together to fighting each other. But what came out was something else entirely. Was it ever real? Meghan stopped folding her clothes. Slowly, she turned around. For a second, she looked like the woman he'd married. Soft, scared, hopeful. Then she blinked, and the armor returned. It was real, she said. Until it wasn't. That line hit him like a brick. He took a step closer, eyes red. You said you'd never leave me. I said I'd never let them destroy me, she replied. And staying here is destroying me. There it was them. The invisible enemy that had haunted their marriage from day one. The press. The palace. The public. The whispers. The shadow of Diana. Harry had spent years fighting them, but now he realized he couldn't tell where they ended and where Meghan began. Don't let them win, he whispered. Meghan's reply was cold, measured, final. I'm not letting them win. I'm just done playing. And with that, she went back to packing. For Harry, that was the moment the fairy tale finally died. Not with betrayal, not with infidelity, with exhaustion. He walked out of the room and into the garden, where the California night air was heavy with jasmine and silence. He sat on a bench and stared at the stars, the same stars his mother used to tell him were watching over him. He wanted to believe Diana was up there now, offering him comfort. But all he could feel was her absence, the same hollow ache that had followed him since he was 12 years old. And for the first time, he whispered out loud, "Mom, I can't do this anymore." What he didn't know was that Meghan had heard him. She stopped at the top of the stairs, listening. For a moment, her eyes filled with tears. But instead of going to him, she wiped them away and went back to her phone. A flight confirmation blinked on her screen. Departure, tomorrow morning. Destination, unknown. The next morning, Harry woke up to find the bed empty. The suitcase gone. The air still smelling faintly of her perfume. On the nightstand sat a note. Not a goodbye, a statement. It read, "You told your story. Now I have to tell mine." And that's when Harry broke completely. He ripped off his ring. He threw it across the room. He punched the wall so hard his knuckles bled. For hours, he paced, called her phone, sent messages, none of them delivered. And when he finally collapsed onto the couch, it wasn't as a prince or a soldier or a public figure. It was as a man who had just lost the one thing he thought made leaving his family worth it. By afternoon, the press had already picked up the scent. Cameras outside the gates. Helicopters circling overhead. Reporters shouting. "Prince Harry, is it true Meghan's left you?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. Meanwhile, inside Buckingham Palace, the news had already reached the king. A senior aide later described the scene as tense, almost cinematic. King Charles, sitting at his desk, reading a briefing folder marked urgent. The words "divorce proceedings" underlined in red. He didn't speak for several minutes. Then, quietly, he said, "He's lost himself." But it wasn't sympathy. It was resignation. Because for Charles, Harry's downfall was inevitable. The rebellious son who chose love over duty, freedom over family, and now stood alone, betrayed by both. And yet, despite everything, Charles didn't gloat. He simply asked his staff to prepare a public statement in due course. The monarchy had learned one thing from Diana's era: control the narrative before it controls you. Back in California, Harry was falling apart. He called his therapist. He called old friends. He even called William. No answer. That night, he drove to the beach, alone. He sat in the sand for hours, watching the waves crash in the darkness. wondering how everything had gone so wrong so fast. And somewhere between the roar of the ocean and the echo of his thoughts, a terrible question formed in his mind. Had he made the same mistake as his father? Had he chosen a woman who never really loved him? Only the idea of him? It was a thought he couldn't bear, yet couldn't escape. Because deep down, Harry still loved her. That was the cruelest part. Even after reading the diary, after the silence, after the note, he still loved her. And maybe that's why he didn't fly to London right away. Maybe that's why he didn't issue a statement or call a lawyer. Because a small part of him still believed she'd come back. But days passed, then weeks. And every day, her absence grew louder. The staff whispered that Meghan had moved into a private villa in Beverly Hills. Others claimed she'd been meeting with journalists, trusted voices, as she called them, preparing for something. Harry knew what that meant. She was getting ready to tell her story. And if her diary was any indication, it wouldn't be kind. The thought of that made his chest tighten. Not because he feared public humiliation, he'd lived through worse, but because it meant she was gone for good. And so, for the first time in his life, Harry didn't know who he was. Not a prince, not a husband, not a son. Just a man trapped in the ruins of his own choices. One night, he opened a box of his mother's old letters, ones he'd kept locked away for years. Inside was a line Diana had written to a friend in 1996, after her own separation. You can love someone and still know they're not meant to stay. He read it again and again until the tears blurred the ink. That's when it hit him. Maybe Meghan wasn't betraying him. Maybe she was repeating his mother's story in a way neither of them could escape. And that realization didn't bring peace. It brought fury. Because if Diana's ghost had shaped their marriage, then her shadow was now tearing it apart. And as the world speculated and the palace prepared its next move, Harry made one decision that would shock even his closest friends. He picked up his phone, opened his notes app, and started typing his own version of events. Not for the media, not for revenge, but for one reason only: to reclaim his truth before Meghan's version became history. But the first line he wrote wasn't about Meghan. It was about his mother. I finally understand what she meant when she said love isn't enough. That sentence, raw, simple, devastating, would become the start of something that no one, not even Meghan, could have anticipated. Because Harry wasn't done fighting. He was just getting started. And what he did next would pull the royal family, Meghan, and the entire world into a storm far darker than divorce. It was supposed to be paradise. The place where they'd rebuild, reconnect, and finally live free. The tabloids called it their American dream. But the neighbors in Montecito called it something else entirely: a fortress with tension. Harry and Meghan had chosen the California coast for its promise of peace. Yet somehow, peace was the one thing they could never find. The sunlight that once symbolized freedom now felt harsh, exposing every crack in their lives. The Pacific, once a backdrop for rebirth, now seemed endless and cold, just like the distance between them. Freedom had become isolation. Success had turned into exhaustion. And California, the land of reinvention, had quietly become their cage. From the outside, everything looked perfect. A $14 million mansion, rolling lawns, chicken coops, a private playground for their children. But those close to the couple began noticing something strange. They were rarely seen together. When Harry appeared at charity events or veterans functions, Meghan was traveling for work. When Meghan attended galas or lunches with Hollywood friends, Harry was focusing on projects. The public assumed they were just busy. Insiders knew it was distance disguised as productivity. And that's where the California divide truly began. You could feel it even in their home. The house that once echoed with laughter and toddler giggles was now quiet. Harry spent more time in his office, alone, surrounded by military memorabilia and framed photos of his mother. Meghan preferred the garden, where she'd take phone calls, pacing near the roses she'd planted herself. They lived in the same house, but different worlds. Their daily rhythm became almost mechanical. Coffee in the morning, no eye contact. Separate Zoom calls. Polite nods in passing. At night, Harry would pour himself a drink and sit by the fire pit, while Meghan scrolled through her phone, half distracted, half detached. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't even anger. It was emptiness, the kind that doesn't explode but erodes. One friend who visited described it this way: it felt like two people living on opposite sides of the same dream. But what caused the divide? Some say it was ambition. Others say it was disappointment. Maybe both. When they first left the royal family, they imagined themselves as global changemakers, voices for compassion, equality, and truth. They had massive deals with Netflix and Spotify, interviews lined up, podcasts in production. But by 2024, the shine had faded. The Netflix deal stalled. Spotify canceled their contract. Critics called them unreliable. Hollywood quietly stopped calling. And that failure cut deep. For Meghan, who had always seen herself as a storyteller and strategist, the rejection felt personal. For Harry, it was humiliating. He had left everything, his family, his title, his identity, for this new life. And now, it was slipping away. The fights began quietly, creative differences, financial stress, scheduling conflicts. But underneath all of it was something much bigger: resentment. Harry resented Meghan for pushing them so far from the royal family. Meghan resented Harry for still seeking their approval. It was a slow-motion implosion. The day everything snapped started like any other. They were preparing for a charity event in Los Angeles. Harry wanted it private, understated. Meghan wanted cameras, exposure, momentum. "We need to stay relevant," she reportedly told him. Harry's reply was ice cold. "We need to stay human." That argument lasted 3 hours. Neither of them raised their voice, but every word cut like glass. Meghan accused him of sabotaging her career. Harry accused her of using their pain for attention. By the end of it, Harry slammed the door and left for the beach. Meghan went into the garden and cried. But here's where it gets interesting. That same night, she made a call. Not to a friend, not to her mother, to an old contact from her acting days, someone now connected to a high-profile documentary production company. The next morning, she scheduled a private lunch in Beverly Hills. A week later, word leaked that Meghan was working on a personal reflection project. No titles, no timelines, no official confirmation, just whispers. But the royal rumor mill caught fire. Meghan Markle to tell her story again. Harry was livid. Not because she wanted to tell her truth, but because she was going to do it without him. "You can't just sell our lives," he reportedly told her. "I'm not selling our lives," she replied. "I'm saving mine." And that's when he realized the distance between them wasn't geographical, it was ideological. She wanted control. He wanted redemption. Two people, same dream, opposite directions. In the weeks that followed, Harry threw himself into charity work and mental health advocacy. Meghan doubled down on her Hollywood network. Lunches, meetings, whispers of brand deals. They were both building something, but not together. Their staff noticed the tension immediately. They stopped finishing each other's sentences, one assistant said. They started correcting each other instead. Even the little moments, the ones that make or break relationships, were gone. No shared laughter. No private jokes. No comfort. And in that void, the ghosts returned. Harry began having nightmares again. Flashes of Diana's funeral, the chase, the flashbulbs. Meghan, meanwhile, began journaling again, this time more publicly, through inspirational essays and social posts hinting at rebirth and forgiveness. But forgiveness for what? Some insiders claim Meghan had started seeing a life beyond Harry. Not another relationship, but another identity. A solo brand. Independent, unfiltered, unstoppable. She began rebranding herself subtly, dropping Sussex in certain circles, using Meghan Markle again for professional correspondence. At first, it seemed harmless. Then Harry noticed it too. "You're erasing me," he told her one night. "No," she replied quietly. "I'm finding me." That line haunted him, because deep down, he knew she wasn't wrong. She had lost herself in the chaos of royalty, marriage, and media warfare. But her way of finding herself meant losing him. And that realization broke him all over again. Friends say Harry started isolating. He'd take long drives alone, sometimes all the way to Los Angeles, just to avoid being in that house. Meghan, in turn, began hosting quiet dinners. Female entrepreneurs, publicists, activists, her new tribe. They were orbiting each other, but never meeting in the middle. California had given them freedom, but it had also given them mirrors, and neither of them liked what they saw. There's one story that perfectly captures the collapse. A close friend once visited for dinner. She said Meghan looked radiant, glowing, confident, alive. Harry, on the other hand, looked pale, restless, distracted. During dinner, Meghan mentioned an idea for a children's charity documentary. Harry interrupted, saying gently, "Let's take a break from cameras for a while." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You can take a break, Harry. I can't." The table went silent. The friend said she felt like she was watching two different movies playing in the same room. And that's when she realized something chilling. Meghan had already emotionally left. Harry just hadn't caught up yet. Over time, their staff began quitting. Assistants complained of impossible working environments. Advisors quietly drifted away. Even their dogs, once featured in cozy family photos, were rarely seen together. By now, the Montecito mansion, once a symbol of liberation, had become a mausoleum of memories. One day, Harry packed a small bag and drove north. Alone. No explanation. When he returned 3 days later, Meghan didn't ask where he'd been. He told a friend later that he'd gone to a veterans retreat. "I needed to remember who I was before all this," he said. But Meghan's silence after his return told him everything. She didn't want to remember who he was. She wanted to rediscover who she was. It was no longer Harry and Meghan. It was Harry and Meghan. Two separate headlines. Two separate futures. And that's when the phone rang. It wasn't from Hollywood. It wasn't from Netflix. It wasn't even from London. It was from a name Meghan hadn't heard in years, someone who could shift the power dynamics completely. And that call would change everything. It came just after sunset. The kind of call that doesn't just ring, it cuts through the air like a blade. Meghan had just returned from a lunch in Beverly Hills when her phone lit up with a number she didn't recognize. It wasn't from Los Angeles. It wasn't even from the United States. The caller ID read, +44, United Kingdom. For a second, her hand froze. She hadn't received a direct call from London in months. Everything was usually filtered through aides, lawyers, or PR intermediaries. Direct contact meant something serious, something urgent, something she couldn't ignore. When she finally answered, the voice on the other end was calm, deliberate, and cold. "Good evening, Duchess." Her heart tightened. It wasn't the king. It wasn't William. It was someone she never expected, Sir Edward Finch, a senior royal advisor who had served the palace for decades. The same man who once escorted her to official engagements during her first months as a royal. The man who had whispered to her then, "Welcome to the firm." Now, years later, that same voice was back, and it wasn't welcoming. "Meghan," he said, "I'm calling on behalf of His Majesty's office. There are matters we need to discuss regarding your legal status and public positioning." Legal status. Public positioning. She almost laughed. Even thousands of miles away, they still spoke in riddles. "What do you want?" she asked, keeping her tone sharp but controlled. "Not want," he replied. "Need. There are ongoing discussions concerning your title and associated privileges. His Majesty believes it would be appropriate for you to participate before final decisions are made." She went silent. There it was. The subtext was clear. The royal family was moving, and fast. The divorce rumors had forced their hand. They couldn't afford another uncontrolled narrative. Meghan Markle wasn't just an ex-royal anymore. She was a liability. And in the royal world, liabilities are neutralized quietly. "Let me guess," she said finally, her voice steady but with an edge. "You want to take my titles?" There was a pause on the other end. A pause long enough to confirm she was right. "It's being reviewed," he said. "But that isn't all. There are also concerns regarding the diary. Certain contents that have raised questions about confidentiality and historical record." Her chest tightened. "You've been reading it. Extracts have been made available to the palace through channels." Channels, meaning leaks. Her mind raced. Someone inside her inner circle, one of her few remaining staff, maybe even an old friend, had passed the diary to the palace. A betrayal dressed up as duty. "You had no right," she hissed. "His Majesty has every right," Finch replied evenly. "If sensitive material concerning the late Princess of Wales is being circulated, it becomes a matter of state interest." There it was, the dagger. Diana. They were invoking her memory again, using her name as a weapon. "Don't you dare use her," Meghan said, her voice shaking now. "Not again." Finch didn't respond immediately. When he did, his words were almost surgical. "Mrs. Markle, the late princess's legacy is inseparable from the institution you were part of. If you persist in publicizing personal interpretations of royal matters, you may be endangering your own standing, legally and reputationally." That's when Meghan snapped. My standing, she said, her voice rising. You people erased me long before I ever spoke a word. You silenced me, isolated me, and now you want to take the only story I have left? No, not this time. There was silence. Then, a quiet sigh. I expected you'd say that, Finch said. In that case, you should be aware that a royal statement is imminent. It may not portray you favorably. And just like that, the line went dead. Meghan stood frozen in the middle of her living room, the phone still in her hand, the sun bleeding orange through the window. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. For the first time in years, she felt that same cold chill she'd felt walking through Buckingham Palace, the quiet thread of power moving in the shadows. She sank onto the couch and stared at her reflection in the window. So this was it. The counterattack. The palace had drawn its line. But here's where things took a turn. Meghan wasn't the only one who got a call that night. Across the Atlantic, in London, Harry's phone buzzed around midnight. It was his father's private secretary. The message was simple. His Majesty would like to meet. Urgently. Harry didn't sleep. He booked a flight on the first jet out. When he landed the next morning, he was ushered straight into Clarence's house. No press, no fanfare, just a heavy silence. His father was waiting, sitting by the fireplace, holding a folder. Harry, King Charles said quietly, we need to talk about Meghan. What followed wasn't a conversation, it was a confrontation. Charles explained the palace's position. Meghan's diary was now considered a potential security risk. Its contents, if published, could expose not just private royal information, but also communications and events involving other senior royals. Harry tried to defend her, but his voice broke midway. She's not doing this to hurt anyone, he said. She's doing it because she feels she's never been heard. Charles looked at him for a long moment. Then, almost gently, he said, that may be true, but she isn't being silenced anymore, is she? She's being listened to by the world, and that makes her dangerous. Harry flinched. The word hung in the air like smoke. Dangerous. It wasn't the first time someone in the palace had used that word. Diana had been called it too. And hearing it again, from his father's mouth, made something inside him collapse. She's my wife, he said finally. You can't just erase her. Charles sighed, rubbing his temples. No, Harry, but we can protect the crown. That was the moment Harry realized it. The family he'd fought to protect from the media machine was the machine. And while the palace plotted damage control, Meghan was plotting something else entirely. The next day, she sat down with her PR advisor and her lawyer. She was done reacting. It was time to act. Draft a statement, she said. Not about the divorce. About the truth. Her team hesitated. You're going to challenge the monarchy again? One asked. Meghan looked up from her notes, her expression calm, resolute, almost serene. This isn't about them, she said. It's about me. But even as she said it, she knew the palace would see it differently. They always did. Because once a royal speaks, it's never just personal, it's political. As her lawyer began typing, Meghan turned toward the window, the California sky stretching wide and silent above her. She didn't know it yet, but the statement she was about to release would ignite a chain reaction that neither side could control.